So in this lecture, we're going to be talking about youth oppression and elder oppression. So really the type of oppression we're going to focus on here is ageism. So when we talk about youth oppression and elder oppressions, um, they're rather different. So when we talk about ageism, and I know I used it in the previous slide, ageism is typically referred to elder oppression. So the oppression that is inflicted upon people who are older. And when I mean those who are older, those who are over 65. Now with youth oppression, adultism. So what this type of oppression is, it's based upon the oppression, the exclusion of individuals who are younger than 18. So first we're going to talk about, we're going to be talking about youth oppression first. So really when you think about adultism or youth oppression, it's one that typically doesn't come to mind. So when we think about the oppression of younger people, right? There's a lot of references to Generation Z, those who are younger, they don't know what they're doing. There's a lot of things to be said. And at the same time, there's almost a lack of recognition of the little opportunity for this group to exercise their power within the United States. Um, so with youth oppression, what is restricted is access to goods, services, and privileges of society. Additionally, there's an restricted access to participation in economic and political life within society. So the right to vote, the right to own certain amounts of economic products. Um, those are just simply examples. However, when you think about youth oppression, typically what you see is, or what you hear is in reference to what children or younger people cannot do. And this is, and the decisions the decisions around the interest of younger adults are not taken seriously, and instead is made by older adults. So there is documentation of evidence of youth oppression. However, it's very, very scarce, very, very little research on it. There's a lot of literature on youth, but not too much on youth oppression. So what we do have is some anecdotal and a little bit of empirical evidence. So here are some common statements that your book outlines. First one, you're so smart for 15. So remember, there's that microaggression, right? That micro invalidation. And what you see is the first half is a compliment. The second half is the negative, right? You're so smart. Then you have the negative for 15. And it conveys this message that for most, if not all 15-year-olds, they are not intellectually able. They're not smart. Another one, it's just a stage, you'll outgrow it. Typically, this statement is made in reference or made in response to whenever a younger adult talks about something that's very, very personal to them. Typically, it's their psychological health. And a lot of times what happens is their current reality is denied, or their mental health is denied by the other person. Another one, sexual orientation. So what we do know with research, it suggests that people typically recognize their own sexual orientation within the teenage years. So this is where intersectionality can come into play for youth oppression and for heterosexism. And we'll talk about what heterosexism is when we get to that chapter. But in essence, it's creating this message that whatever you're going through is just a phase. The fact that you may like people of the same sex is a phase. And that's not, first off, that's very hurtful, and it denies that person's reality. What we have with evidence in regards to younger adults is looking at these different interactions, right? Physical and sexual abuse, we have substantial amounts of research as well as evidence for youth oppression via physical and sexual abuse. Another one is punishment. When we look at punishment as a whole, typically what you hear is an acceptance of punishment on younger people. Some of these punishments may include physical punishments, and what we know from research that these type of punishments do not fully address the concern, and it may even worsen it. Now, granted, the different types of punishment that are implemented among younger people creates this sense, it creates this control of a younger person. Also going hand in hand with that, denied control. So not being able to have a say-so in their, in some aspects of their health, such as mental health. That's typically relied upon the parent. When it comes to therapy, while therapy is meant to be, the information shared in therapy is to be confidential, it's important to recognize that the parent is still has some form of say-so in that process. If a teenager was to disclose something really, really personal, the therapist, not the therapist, the parent could say to the therapist, I want access to the files. I want to know what's going on. And that's a very watered down explanation. That's very watered down. And the therapist has to give over or has to disclose what was discussed. Now that creates a concern for teenagers going into therapy, because then that creates these feelings of apprehension and a fear to fully engage in therapy. So what are some other areas where younger people are denied control? So I just want y'all to think about that for a minute. Think of as many as you can. Another one, verbal interactions. So when we think about, well, let me combine verbal interactions and community incidents. So when we think about interactions, the interpersonal occurrences with younger people, what you do see is there's this assumption that younger people are to be respectful towards people who are older, right? The parent may say, "Go hug your Aunt Sally, go kiss your Uncle Buck," and that teenager may not want to do that. However, given the social circumstances, it's expected that that younger people do follow through with their parents' orders, so to speak. And there's repercussions if they do not do as they are told. So overall, when we're looking at youth oppression, while this is something that is Um, this is something that youth oppression has occurred for quite some time. Uh, and really what research is doing now is documenting uh, or conceptualizing experiences of youth within an oppression-based lens. So overall, when it comes to youth oppression, there is this great sense of control of youth by people who are older. So a lot of decisions are made for people who are younger. When we think about reproductive health, um, typically those who are creating the reproductive health programs are those of adults. And and a lot of times what you see adults making references that teenagers don't know how to control themselves. They don't know how to uh, they make bad decisions, so forth and so on. Now, recognizing from biological studies, there is some truth to what is being said. When you look at the development of your frontal cortex, that is the last part to develop, and typically up until the age of 26, your frontal cortex is developed by that point. Now, is that to completely say that um, teenagers do not have a say-so in what is done to them in regards to their bodies, as well as their sexual health? No. There should be, excuse me, it's important to recognize that that is important part of autonomy, and in denying a person control over their body is also denying, you're denying their autonomy. And in essence, that's what we see within youth oppression. Now, when it comes to elder oppression, they're very much the same thing. The only difference is that it targets um, people who are older, right? Um, People who are older. So historically, um, we have this sense of appreciation for people who are older adults. However, um, when it comes to opportunities and privileges, that's where that appreciation stops. We have statements say, "Oh, we respect our elders, we care for the elderly." However, where it stops at is providing them with a sense of power, providing opportunities to exercise that power, and then also restricting access to participation in economic and political life. Um, so when we think about jobs, uh, what we do recognize is that people who are older um, do not get jobs. It's not that they don't; they experience job discrimination their based upon their age, and that's something important to recognize. So let me switch over to the next slide. So with elder oppression, it comes in many different forms. Um, so like I mentioned before, older adults are respected in word. However, when it comes to different aspects of life, they are not. Uh, they tend to be the focus of discrimination and prejudice within work, and when it comes to sexual intimacy. Um, when we think about uh, older adults having sex or kissing or um, hugging in a sexual fashion, um, or touching in a sexual fashion, typically the response that you see amongst other people is disgust. Um, there are some references in movies where you saw two older adults kissing, people display disgust. They make these faces like, ew, that's gross. Well, why is it gross? Is it gross because they're kissing, or is it gross because it is two older adults kissing? So when it comes to sexual intimacy in particular, there is experiences of discrimination and prejudice against older adults. When they go to the doctor, the patient who is older may express some concerns related to their sexual health, and the doctor may microaggress against them, saying, "What do you need to do that for? You're past your prime," and that creates, number one, that facilitates embarrassment, and it also denies a reality amongst older adults. To be quite clear, older adults are still having sex. It's not where you get to 65 and you're like, oh, that's it, I'm not doing it no more. No, that's not true. Humans are sexual all throughout their lifespan, and to deny older adults, to deny the reality of that amongst older adults creates, not only creates, but maintains that elder oppression, creating shame in particular. Also within society, we see that there are a lot of concerns about growing older. Like I mentioned, I outlined sex, and I have links here that I will provide for you to watch about sexual intimacy and older adults. And then lastly, beauty standards. So and this is geared typically towards women, and also it can be towards men as well. So with a lot of beauty commercials, there's a lot of commercials related to anti-aging, anti-wrinkle creams, addressing crow's feet, um, this the folds on your neck, um, Botox to make yourself look younger, as if to appear that you don't have wrinkles. Another one for men, uh, what it what is conveyed is that men, when they become older, um, they lose their sexual prowess, and what is constantly conveyed is that there's this association between being sexual and masculinity amongst men. And so for older men, well, this might be helpful for the sex part, but I'll still continue it on anyway. Um, uh, there's this consistent, there's a lot of commercials geared towards men who are older to take the little blue pill, uh, so that they can keep erections and that they can engage with their partners. Another one, when it comes to gray hair, typically what is said about gray hair, uh, it's almost as if gray hair is not something that is wanted. Now, it's very weird because depending upon who we're talking about, gray hair is okay. For women, typically what is done, dyeing hair is done to hide your gray hair. For men, it's almost a sign of wisdom in some instances, but then as you get older, uh, then it doesn't become as valued. So elder abuse, your book talks about elder abuse, and this is a very widespread phenomenon. As many as 1.2 million older adults are physically abused and neglected. That's a very, very big portion, and it's typically underreported. Uh, the World Health Organization, they reported at least 36% of nursing home staffs in the US did report elder abuse. Um, so when you're looking at how we treat older people who are older, they're typically undervalued, and within nursing homes and nursing care facilities, there's a lot of evidence of elder abuse. So this is a question I pose to y'all in looking at uh, elder abuse. So I have a percentage here, but obviously you don't know it unless you read the chapter. Um, but how much percentage of nursing home staff in the US reported having witnessed at least one incident of physical abuse of an older patient? So this is in reference to somebody on staff that has witnessed at least one incident of physical abuse. So I'll give you a minute, well, a couple seconds. Oops, sorry. All right, so approximately 10%. That's not a lot. Um, so when we think about that, typically, well, when we think about that and overall, what it suggests is that elder abuse is typically underreported. Now, when it comes to intersectionality, and I hinted on that a little bit earlier in the lecture, um, we do see we do see oppressions at the intersection. So when we look at the Black elderly, your book outlines this in particular, we recognize that there are a lot more older people who are Black, who are going to increase within the upcoming years. The concern becomes that what we have now is that approximately 33% of Black elderly live in poverty. And a lot of times this is stemming from historical treatment and socioeconomic disadvantages. Another one is related to health conditions. So a lot of times when, and your book outlines it, when Black older adults go to their general care practitioners, go see their doctors, their symptoms are typically minimized. So if a older adult who is Black complains of chest pains, their symptoms are typically minimized by the doctor. And what we do know is that not recognizing some of these health conditions at that point in time, at that age, it may worsen, or the condition itself may worsen. Okay. So with all of that and outlining ageism and adultism, we do see an impact on those who are impacted by it. So when it comes to beliefs about decision making, what we have noticed is that there's a lot of decisions made for older and younger people by middle-aged folk. And typically what happens is those beliefs are internalized. Older people who are older may say things as if, oh, yeah, it's fine, you go ahead and do that. I don't think I can do it. Same thing about people who are younger. They may engage in behavior that is reflective of the biases from adultism, and they may actually monitor other younger adults, excuse me, not younger adults, but people who are younger to as well, excuse me. When it comes to younger people, they're typically rewarded for engaging in youth oppressions toward other young people. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier. And really what that reward is just respect. But this respect isn't based upon the respect of being a human. Instead, it's more of staying in line with adultism. Another one, older adults may reinforce those beliefs. Um, Something such as saying, I'm having a senior moment. Uh, that's just a simple example of uh, an internalized thought, internalized belief of ageism. Notably, amongst people who are older, there's an experience of feelings of loss of value and of being a bother. So when it comes to ageism and I also argue adultism, those who are impacted experience these feelings as a result of their as a result of these oppressions, of these denials of their experiences. So when it comes to allyship, right, um, there's a lot of ways on how you could um, assist people who are younger and people who are older. So just looking at looking at these tips and these guidelines that your book provides, really what they all say is to um, be open to going to spaces um, for people who are younger, and opening up opportunities to create these relationships with them as well. Another one, when it comes to creating an advisory board, encourage people who are younger to join and to lead. So overall, creating opportunities for people who are younger to speak, to lead, and to grow in their relationships with you um, is very, very, very helpful. Now, when it comes to people who are older, very much the same thing. And also challenging those assumptions that you've had about older adults. Number one, assume elders are potentially brilliant. Don't assume that just because that they are a person who is because they're older that they're lacking in intelligence. Um, that's really important in interactions, because in recognizing that bias and assuming that they are potentially brilliant, it allows for you that space to share that vulnerability with that individual, as well as um, to support that individuals. Another one, assume productive futures. Yes, they are older. Um, they are older in age, and that doesn't mean you have to treat them like they're dying. That it doesn't provide any productivity to the relationship, and further making that assumption that they're going to die soon, or treating them as if they are. First off, that's bad. Um, because in essence you're reminding that you may be um, reinforcing beliefs around ageism. So assuming productive futures, um, number one, instills that hope that that is very much there, and it provides a different perspective for you in your interactions with older adults. And a really big one, assuming mental and physical deterioration is due to a combination of distress or ill health, not aging. There is correlation between, uh, for example, Alzheimer's disease amongst people who are older, but correlation is not causation. In essence, with Alzheimer's, what it is, it's deterioration of the brain. In a very watered down explanation, it's really related to deterioration, not aging. And what we do know is that based upon distress, based upon health. That deterioration can be slowed, or it can hasten. So, in assuming this combination, you're creating that, you're challenging that notion that um, getting older is associated um, with with deterioration, or that aging causes it. So we talked a lot about different things today for youth and elder oppression. We talked about the ways in which they occur, the treatments historically that have been done, and uh, ways that it impacts those who are targeted. So, also, we also talked about allyship. So overall, I'm hoping that with this discussion, it creates some thought-provoking uh, thoughts in you about youth and elder oppression, um, and also within your own experiences with people who are older and people who are younger, and maybe with yourself. Um, and if there are some concepts that aren't really clear, please feel free to email me, contact me to outline or to address your questions. And next slide, I will cover the next chapter of Even the Rat Was White.